Welcome to everybody. I understand that this is one of our largest gatherings virtually. So obviously it's a topic that everyone is interested in hearing today. And we've recognized the importance of our proximity in this general area to an international airport of the caliber of Halifax for many, many years. It's always been a selling point. And so without further ado, we'll move on. First of all, special welcome to the Colchester County Mayor, Christine Blair, for joining us today. We also welcome Sherry Somerville, the CEO of the Atlantic Chamber of Commerce, and a special welcome, as well as representatives from chambers all across Nova Scotia, again, in recognizing the importance of the international airport to us all. We'd also like to acknowledge our guests from as far away as San Antonio International Airport joining us today. I'm going to trust their weather is a little different than ours, although maybe it wasn't a couple of weeks ago, along with many members and partners in business. There's no question the airline industry is one of the hardest hit sectors during the pandemic, as leisure travel has been crushed. I know there's a lot of disappointed people that aren't packing their suitcases for March break this year. But we certainly cannot overlook the importance of our air services as economic drivers, the essential service of moving freight in and out. I believe it's one of the longest runways available for freight delivery, and we recognize the importance every day. We are pleased to bring this information session to you from one of our valued members and partner in business, who will share a firsthand perspective of the impacts of the region's largest international airport. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Joyce Carter. She is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Halifax International Airport Authority, HIAA. Joyce joined HIAA. I'm gonna struggle with that one. I know that was done on purpose. Thanks, Sherry. In 1999, and has been an integral part of HIA's growth and development since then, becoming the Chief Financial Officer in 2006. Chief Strategy Officer in 2008, and President and CEO since 2014. Joyce's leadership skills have been called upon more than ever, as Canada's airport and travel and tourism industry have been pummeled by the COVID-19 pandemic. Her connections and contributions to the aviation industry on a regional, national, and international basis will assist Halifax Stanfield on its road to recovery. She's the current chair of the Canadian Airports Council, board member of the Airports Council International, World Governing Board, HCI North America Board of Directors, and board member and past president of the Board of Directors of the Atlantic Canada Airport Association. And she found time to join us today, so thank you. Well known for her strong leadership skills and experience, she was named one of Atlantic Canada's top 50 CEOs by Atlantic Business Magazine in each of the last 4 years, and received the Gold Award in the Business Leader of the Year category at 2019 Halifax Business Awards, hosted by the Halifax Chamber of Commerce. So without further ado, thank you very much, Joyce, for joining us, and I give you Joyce Carter. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Ron, and good morning, everyone. Thank you as well, Sherry. And it is really great to see some familiar faces on the screen and some familiar names as well. So thank you to everyone who has joined today. We're going to share our screen, so you should be able to hopefully see the screen now, and I will give some remarks, and then as Sherry mentioned, we'll open up for questions. Thanks as well to the Truro and Colchester Chamber of Commerce for asking us to come and speak with you today. We really do value the opportunity to get our story out. So we appreciate the invitation, and we appreciate the opportunity to update you on what's happening here at Halifax Stanfield and talk about the ongoing impact that COVID-19 has had on our industry and our region. And I was mentioning to Sherry as we were sitting in the wait room before the session started, ironically, the last time that I spoke to a large crowd in person was exactly a year ago. It was on March 11th of 2020, and it was at your annual general meeting. So those that were at that meeting will certainly remember that day. We gathered in person in Truro, and we welcomed the Honorable Perrin Beatty, Little did we know then what was lying ahead for us, being a global pandemic. And certainly, I'm sure you're very aware now that obviously about the pandemic, but as well how it has continued to strongly suppress, as Ron mentioned, all aspects of travel and tourism, and in particular the aviation sector. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that today. And then, as I mentioned, happy to take any questions and have a dialogue at the end. That's actually always the best part of these sessions. So a little bit about what was happening before the pandemic as a reminder. So if we were to look back at 2019, the first or last, I guess, full year prior to the pandemic, we here would have welcomed 4.2 million passengers, as Ron mentioned as well, also huge for the supply chain, so 41,000 metric tons of cargo. As an airport, we contributed $4 billion annually to the provincial economy, 120 organizations working here on site, and 5,600 jobs directly here on our campus. That's 5,600 people that worked here every day. So ground things like, if you think about who that is, ground handlers, firefighters, flight crew, the Aerotech Park and specialists there. I mean, the hotels, security personnel, airline personnel, all of that. And certainly going into 2020, when I spoke to you a year ago, we expected that this year would be another, 2020 would have been another fantastic year of continuing to connect our communities to the world. We certainly couldn't have imagined what was facing us, being really one of the worst years and for sure the worst period in aviation history. So the pandemic hit us hard. It was around the time of March break. I was with you on March 11th, and it was on March 13th when the state of emergency was declared, and both the provincial and federal government introduced quarantine restrictions, really meaning that anyone coming into Nova Scotia had to self-isolate for 14 days. And as you know, those restrictions and that state of emergency remain in place today, a year later. There were many actions that we took at Halifax Stanfield. So even before the state of emergency had been declared, we do a fair amount of planning. We always have. And so as we were seeing what was happening in Asia, we began to prepare for what was coming. We asked employees to work from at home, those who could do so, obviously running an essential service. That was not everyone, but those who could work from at home began to do so almost immediately. And we very quickly put new protocols in place. So you'll see here on the screen some of those, but things like we've talked about for quite a while, our enhanced cleaning. We hired more staff in the area of cleaning. Obviously, we rolled out lots of things like more sanitization, removed public seating, supported physical distancing wherever we could. And all of these efforts in the early days, and that continues today, were to ensure that those who have to travel, and in particular, if you remember at that time, lots of folks trying to get home, repatriation flights, is we wanted you to feel safe in every part of your journey, and in particular as you transition through our facility. So in response to fewer travelers, which happened almost instantly, what we saw obviously was fewer bookings with the airline carriers, additional border restrictions. Airlines began to cut back and to cut back quite dramatically on the options that they offered for service here. WestJet, one of our main carriers, cut capacity by over 90% in the region. So they are currently only serving 2 routes out of Halifax. Air Canada cut pretty well all interregional service and clawed back frequencies for the destinations that are left. So they currently only serve 3 destinations out of Halifax. And sadly, both of those airlines have continued to cut. And so cities like Ottawa, Gander, Sydney have lost connectivity from Halifax altogether. It's the first time in 78 years that there's been no passenger service interprovincially. So that means those who live in Cape Breton now have to take a 4-hour drive, in some cases longer, depending on where you are, to get to Halifax Stanfield to then be able to connect to the rest of Canada. When we look at airlines like Porter, they haven't operated here since last March, and we have not serviced US flights or international flights since April of last year. Low-fare airlines such as Swoop and Flair are also struggling. They're trying to get a foothold in the region, and with some of the strictest domestic travel restrictions that we have in place, it's very difficult for them to maintain those services. I mean, there just is no demand. So Swoop stopped flying here in January, and interestingly, Flair recently announced their intention to restart service, but they've made it very clear that they will do so when restrictions lift. So they're planning to return to Halifax. We're very hopeful. They'll fly to Toronto, but in addition, they'll fly to Ottawa. That's great. We have no service to Ottawa today. And they're telling us they'll fly to a new destination, which is Kitchener-Waterloo in Ontario. In addition to those routes, the good news for our passengers is that it will give some choices of flights over the next little while if in fact they do return. But the service, as I mentioned, is very dependent on restrictions being lifted. You can imagine if you're having to do the 14-day quarantine, then visiting family and friends, tourism for sure, and business travel just is not viable for you. So when you want to, if you want to sort of look back as a comparison, we have a little map we'll show that always is a shock. So going into 2020, we would have had 200 flights a day. We would have had 17 airlines serving us here at Halifax Stanfield, and those airlines would have taken you to 46 destinations. So this image you have on the screen now shows the routes that were planned for 2020, and that included some new services we had announced to Munich and Manchester as an example. Our connectivity to domestic US and international locations has really been decimated by the pandemic. So we'll put up now a slide that shows you the service that remains here today. And as you can see, it's the four destinations that I mentioned a few moments ago. So St. John's, Montreal, Toronto, and Calgary. We have no US service and we have no international service. So I'm sure you'll agree that transition is a little startling when you see it. I've worked here a long time. It's taken us more than a decade to build up the services that we had prior to the pandemic. And we know that it will take years to get those routes back. And in some cases, we might not get them back at all. Certainly, the drop in passenger traffic through the pandemic has been, as I mentioned, quite dramatic, and that is because of lack of demand. So you may have seen a media release that we issued in January. We compared the day-to-day scenery at the airport a little bit to a scene in The Walking Dead. The image I have, I'm not live in the hold room right now, but the image in the background behind me is an actual shot in our hold room. So we served last year 76% fewer passengers than we did in 2019. But what's most staggering about that, and you can see here on this chart, is 2/3 of those passengers that went through our airport last year traveled between the months of January and March. So when you look at April through to December, our volumes were actually down 91% compared to the same time last year. And we don't expect a whole lot of improvement in activity until many more Nova Scotians, and in fact, many more Canadians are vaccinated, until the 14-day requirement to quarantine is lifted, and until travelers start to feel comfortable to travel again. So our forecasts for this year, for 2021, actually show that our numbers will be worse than they were last year. We won't have the strong first quarter as we did last year. And as we know, sun flights and US and international destinations, or you may know, are currently not permitted to fly from our airport. So certainly we don't expect those numbers to pick up anytime soon. And you may or may not know that we're a non-share capital corporation. So we're not run by the government. We're not funded by the government. We rely entirely on passengers to generate the majority of our revenue. So we are required, if we have any surplus from that, to reinvest it back into the facility for ongoing operations and improvements. So it's like a user pay system, so to speak. When people travel, we generate revenue, and then that's there to support our operations. Sometimes people will ask me, I just saw a social media post on the weekend about this. They'll say, well, why are you still open? Your situation is quite bleak, and why do you remain open? And so I want to say that we remain open because we are a critical piece of transportation infrastructure. We have to remain open. As Ron mentioned, we safely move goods, we move essential workers. So the passengers that we do have traveling are essential workers. We facilitate medevac flights, and we provide other important services. And in particular, as we start to recover, when the economy starts to rebound, they really will depend on air service. We are the largest international airport in Atlantic Canada. We're open so that people can stay connected, obviously, to loved ones when the time is right, so that they can stay employed. So lots of certainly workers who transfer to their work, so that those who can serve their customers are able to do so. And as importantly, the important supplies and deliveries from all over the world. I mean, who hasn't shopped online through the pandemic? And Amazon Prime, it's on your doorstep in 2 days. That takes an airport to get that here. So the role that we've played as an airport in supporting communities, I could argue, is more important than ever. It was important back last March as Canadians scrambled to return home when the crisis began, when millions of masks and PPE were delivered around the world to airports in Canada for our healthcare workers. And now when you look at the vaccine and the doses that are coming into Canada, those are arriving by air. So just so important that we remain open. But the thing is, when you run an airport, whether you have one flight or you have 1,000 flights landing here a day, as you can well imagine, the costs are substantial and a large portion of those are fixed. And so to safely manage operate our terminal building is quite expensive. So I also want to say, as part of our recovery for COVID-19, we've looked at every opportunity we can to cut our costs and to improve our efficiencies. Some of you may have traveled recently, but if you haven't, some of these pictures will tell the story. So we consolidated the terminal building. We closed down areas that we're not using. We refocused to the main gates that we had to use. We've closed our parking lots, the ones that we don't need, literally shut down escalators, as you can see here, turned off the lights, did anything we possibly can to reduce the costs. We also last year, about halfway through the year, reduced our workforce, and we sincerely regret, the worst thing about this in terms of our sector is the loss of jobs. And so we reduced our workforce by about 25%. And it's a very difficult thing, as you know well, in your own businesses. Your people are a big part of the reason why you're recognized the way you are, why your customers value, in our case, one of the best airports for our size in the world. And so it's been a really tough time for our team. But I have to say, airport businesses have been also, our partners have been significantly impacted by the disruption in air travel. These are real pictures. So this is in our terminal building, the Starbucks. Who would have thought Starbucks would close? And aircraft that are parked that are just not requiring to be flying. And so 70% of our business inside the terminal remain closed today. They may never be able to reopen, and in some cases, they may not be able to reopen for years. Because when you think about it, our facility is built to process 4.5 million passengers. As I mentioned, the jobs are the toughest point. So our toughest part, when you look at the employment, the industry itself is looking at a 50% reduction in jobs as a result of the pandemic. And we certainly need some government leadership and action to get those jobs back. And I'll talk about that in a few moments. So the government back in November of last year, the very end of November, issued what was called the Fall Economic Statement. And in that statement, they did acknowledge the impact that the pandemic has had disproportionately on the aviation sector. So that was really good to hear. It was the first time we heard from our federal government that our sectors has been one of the hardest hit. They did make some announcements with respect to relief for airports, not yet for airlines, but we hold hope for that. Certainly, we continue to dig deeper into the programs that they announced last fall and understand what is applicable to us. you'll hear the Minister of Transport talk about a series of initiatives that will benefit airports. They are stating that it amounts to a little over $1 billion. It's really important to note that when you look at the analysis behind that, and Ron mentioned them on the Canadian Airports Council, they've done a fair amount of work to analyze what that is, and it is only roughly 20% of that that will come in the form of direct support. So unfortunately, that announcement is certainly short of what some of the requests were. And one of the major, asks that we've had, people say to me, well, how do you afford to stay open? Well, we've got the benefit of being able to borrow. We've got extremely supportive credit agencies and credit, our banks and our bondholders. However, that debt obviously needs to be repaid, and it is not inexpensive. And so one of the things we've asked is support with respect to our debt. We're not asking for a bailout, but we're certainly asking for interest-free loans that will help the sector come out of the pandemic, and then obviously repay those when the time is right. So we do know that it will take several years in the making for the recovery. We have taken advantage of the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy Program. So that's a program that's scheduled to end this June. We are calling on the government to extend that program. We certainly will qualify, and will qualify for some time, given that aviation is not expected to recover until the majority of Canadians are vaccinated. And we're still hearing that hopefully that is going to be this fall for Nova Scotians and for Canadians. We did receive some ground lease rent relief. So I'll remind you that although we're run independently, our airport is actually owned by the federal government. We pay them rent on this facility. They did give us relief. So in other words, you don't have to pay us, thankfully, for the years 2020 and 2021. That's a small value to us. It's a few $1,000,000. If I were to put it in perspective, it will get us through, a few weeks in the very tough winter operation months. But certainly we've asked them to extend that rent relief until we recover. And so we are still waiting to hear from them on that second request. But as I mentioned, we were looking for interest-free loans. And we have asked that that be extended, and we will pay that back, but we will not be able to pay that back until the industry recovers. So borrowing to keep the lights on, to keep the doors open, certainly is a very difficult financial position, as many of you would know, for your business to be in. And when you look at the current situation in Canada and even here in Nova Scotia, we know that it still could be weeks or even months before we see air travel start to pick up again. And in fact, in recent days, the federal government made travel restrictions even tighter, as you may know. I think the new level of restrictions took place on the 22nd of February. And that was around concerns of the variants. And I know they're very concerned about the variants, and obviously they should be. So the restrictions announced on February 22nd requires Canadians entering the country to provide proof of a negative test before they board a flight. And then again, they must have a test at only 4 airports are allowed to accept them. So they must have a test at one of those 4 airports. And then, as you know, they are also required to quarantine at a hotel at their own cost for a minimum of 3 days before they then can continue on to their final destination. So if your final destination is Halifax, Nova Scotia, Truro, then you are requiring to do all of that before you then can connect on to Halifax and then start your 14-day quarantine here. And we also know that the vast majority, and so Tiffany's put up a great slide here, the vast majority of Canadians support these new travel restrictions. So a recent poll, as you see here, said that 83% of Canadians support the new travel rules. 64% of those said they aren't going to be comfortable traveling abroad until at least 2022. The good news on the flip side is Narrative Research, so that's a local company, we all know them well, in January of 2021 asked Atlantic Canadians what activity they were looking forward to the most when the pandemic is over. And the option that came in the number 2 spot, following being able to go out without a mask, was traveling outside of the Atlantic region. And in fact, 20% of respondents ranked this at the top of their list, with a similar number of people saying traveling internationally will be what they're looking forward to the most. So we know that the demand is there. We know it'll take some time. We just need to get through this very, very difficult time. And that's why it's so important to instill passenger confidence. That's going to just be so critical to bolster recovery and the return to air travel. And so we're doing absolutely everything we can to instill confidence in the traveler. So you'll see some of the things. We had put mandatory masking in place prior to the provincial government requiring it last spring. As I mentioned, the enhanced cleaning and the distancing measures. We also limit today to the terminal building, in case you're not aware, travelers and workers only. So meeters and greeters are asked to not come into the terminal building. This helps with our distancing as an example. And we're really proud that those measures have been recognized and certified by Airports Council International as meeting globally recognized standards for healthy airports. So I'm sure many businesses on the call today have done many things in your workplaces to adjust. And we just wanted to share with you some of the things that we've done to help make our guests and our workers feel more comfortable. It'll take coordination, however, from all parts of our tourism and our business sector to build back that confidence and with our carriers in every aspect of the travel journey. So we definitely will do our part to continue to change processes and implement solutions to increase confidence. We expect to see an increase in self-serve and touchless technology. We're working on some of that now. We want to reduce person-to-person interactions, so much what we're not about when you think about how welcoming of an airport we are. But we know it's really important, in particular at this time. And so we will adjust our processes and our infrastructure to allow for that. And we also expect some form of permanent health check facilities to be required not only for inbound travelers, but as well for outbound travelers. So when you think about 9/11 and you think about the change in security that happened at airports after 9/11, think about the pandemic and think about the change in health checks that may become permanent going forward. And in fact, this is a picture here at our airport, the Canadian Air Transport Security Authority, CATSA pre-board screening, as we all know it, implemented temperature checks here at Halifax Stanfield last year, and those remain in place today. We also know that vaccines being deployed across the country is going to be really important. But in advance of doing that, testing is something that is also so important to help identify cases when they arrive and hopefully on departure before people travel. So that will be another level of protection that we would really welcome here to Halifax Stanfield, where we welcome the opportunity to be able to do that here. It'll help instill confidence. We really do feel it will help increase demand. And ultimately, with increased confidence, with increased demand, then what you're going to see is you're going to see the return to services slowly. Be lots of competition for services going forward amongst many cities and many countries, but we really do feel that it will return the service that our community members expect to see and that you'll need as you start to travel again. We know that it's important to look at science-based approaches, and testing is one of those that we support. So to that end, we did submit a proposal to the province of Nova Scotia and Dr. Strang's office on how it could work at Halifax Stanfield. We're working with them on that now, and we're hopeful that it will be implemented soon. With many of our cases in Nova Scotia being attributed to essential travel in and out of the province, we really do want to be part of the solution. And so to keep our communities safe, and as I mentioned, to help instill that confidence in the travel process, we see testing as one of the things that will add to that. So on a bright spot, I want to take a moment just to talk about our air cargo logistics park and again, the supply chain that we mentioned earlier. So this is an aerial shot. It's much further along than this today. Those of you that travel by the highway will have seen the building come out of the ground. So this is the cargo park that's viewable from the 102 highway. It is on track to be completed in 2021. And I'm pleased to announce that the new building will have full occupancy. So cargo jet and First Catch are the two tenants that are going to be occupying that building. So if you drive by today, you'll see the building is about 2/3, I believe, constructed at this point. And when it's complete, which will be by the end of the year, we'll be able to accommodate 5 additional full-size freighters every day. So that's in addition to the service we do today. We'll have storage space right here on site. And as you know, one of the main products we export is live Nova Scotia lobster. So that's very helpful for that. We were pleased that 2019 was once again a record year for cargo. That was our 6th straight year in a row. We did have a decrease last year. That was mostly almost the opposite of passengers when you think about it. In those first few months, January, February, March, this is where we had the early signs of the decrease in cargo at our airport. And certainly what that did for us is it showed us early that our numbers were going to start to come down. So sorry, I'm just going to get my notes back. Here we go. So while I want to say that cargo is not a substantial revenue generator for us, it certainly is really important to the Nova Scotia economy and something we support for that reason. It is really important in the supply chain, more so in a pandemic, and how people are going to operate going forward and just provide such great economic output to our province. So that's what I'll say about cargo. And in closing, what I'd like to do is just leave you with a couple of key takeaways that I want to reiterate. I get a lot of people say, so what can we do to help? The first thing I want to say is with so much uncertainty, it really is difficult to predict the recovery, when it will begin. It certainly hasn't started yet, and how quickly we may get flights back. We know there's pent-up demand, but I have to say that the aviation sector, and it's nice to see Doug Bastow on the call, a board member of ours, and an ex-employee in this sector. He knows, and many do very well, how complex it is and how long it is going to take to build that back up. Airlines will need to rehire staff if their staff has not moved on. They'll need to retrain their employees. They have let aircraft go. They have canceled orders for future aircraft. They have let them back to the lessors. So certainly rebuilding their networks to profitability will take some time. We know that the investment and the time that it's going to take is going to be needed and it's going to be warranted. But I have to say, it's not like flipping a switch. We're doing everything we can here to keep our communities connected, and we will continue to do that. The second thing I want to mention is around passenger confidence, and hopefully you've seen from my remarks how important that is to the entire sector and to us as well. We know it's really important to sectors like tourism and hospitality, and the more that we can work together to ensure that the process is seamless and is healthy for our guests, the better we will be. So airport testing, we feel, is a really important part of that in restoring connectivity before people go off into our communities. So we'll continue to pursue that here at Halifax Stanfield. And finally, government support. So we need support from them more than ever. We obviously need the support of our community when the time is right, but we really do need the Canadian government to step up and to help save Canadian aviation. The time couldn't be more important. When you think about the vast size of our country, air travel is not a privilege, right? So it's not like you can take a train, right, as some other countries can do. It certainly is a very critical piece of our transportation network, and the pace of recovery in Canada is going to depend on having a good transportation network. So we don't exist for ourselves. We exist entirely to serve, right? So we're here to serve our communities. We're here to serve our partners. We're here to serve our passengers. And we know that we'll embrace that with enthusiasm, and we can't wait to welcome you back again when the time is right. So I will stop there. Perhaps Ron and Sherry, I'm mindful of the time, 11:38, and happy to answer any questions that folks on the line may have.
Great. Well, first, thank you very much, Joyce, for breaking it down into very simple terms that we can all understand the economic impact that your major airport has had over the past, well, really year, and then we're heading into another year that's, is going to be fraught with challenges as well. We do have one question there. I think Ron is going to ask that. And I just want to put out a reminder that Joyce is happy to answer any questions that anyone may have. Just please put your name in the chat, and then I will call on you as time allows. So if you would like to ask Joyce a question, please just let us know that you would, and we'll open that up to you. So Ron, would you like to start us off?
Sure, Joyce. Thank you very, very much. It's amazing when you think that the airport itself is larger than many of our small towns. It probably has all the infrastructure of most municipalities and quite an entity unto itself. But my question was simply, I know there's a difference between the airport authority and the carriers. And in that relationship, if you can explain a little bit about how that works, and whether or not the airlines, which are often the subject of news stories, centering on service, centering on refunds for tickets, whether that's had an effect on airport authorities around the country and how they're perceived in regards to that relationship.
Thank you. That's a really good question, Ron. And it's funny how you compare us to a small town. I used to say I'm like the mayor of, Halifax, Stanfield. So when you think about all of the facilities that you would receive as being in a town, exactly as that's what it's like here at Halifax, Stanfield. So you gave me a little laugh when you said that. And the relationship question is a really important one, right? So it's always amazes me. We've been an airport authority now for 20 years. And just in understanding the supply chain and how it works, we are all participants in it, in what I call the travel supply chain. The airport is one of those. The air carriers are another significant participant, as you can imagine. So when I mentioned that we're a non-share capital corporation, that's exactly what we are. We get no funding from government. In fact, the air carriers would be by far our largest client. So they are a client of ours, they're a customer, and we work really carefully with them. In some cases, and I know we have some of our business development team on the line, is to show them the business development reasons as to why we should enhance, grow, provide new services at Halifax Stanfield. So, we get lots of great data to show us generally where people travel, how they do that. And we work really closely with these carriers to give them the business case for the support for these services. So this is how we grow our business, not only from a passenger perspective, but from a cargo perspective as well. So when it comes to how the sector has been decimated by the pandemic, every participant in that supply chain is very significantly impacted. Every participant has different levers it can pull to try and reduce costs or to respond. You'll see the carriers come out, and you're right. I think you mentioned, they own the relationship often with the passengers. We do, but they do as well. It's kind of the shared relationship. You mentioned the service they provide on board the flight, obviously very much controlled by them. And you mentioned the refund issue. And so a very important issue that I know is getting a lot of coverage right now. When the government is considering support of the sector, it is very aware that support has to come to all participants in that sector because we do work so closely together. However, it has to look very different depending on who you are in terms of the participant in the sector. And so the refund issue is an issue that has been on the table for quite some time now. The government has made it very clear when they talk about support of air carriers. Now, this is not support of airports, but support of air carriers, that in designing what, if they're going to do it, what that may look like, they have to address the refund issue. So very clearly in the early days, for the first time in aviation history, bookings or cancellations outweighed bookings. So think about that, right? So you're running your business and all of a sudden you have had more orders canceled than you do new bookings. And that continued for several months to the point where they used to be able to predict their business many months in advance, and now it's a matter of days, right? People are just not booking trips into the future for all of the uncertainty and lack of confidence really in the whole process. So it would have bankrupted carriers. There's no question when you look at their balance sheets if they were to issue all those refunds instantly. Some carriers have done different things with refunds, but clearly it's a really important topic with the government, and one that they've stated before they, two things they've said before they support the carriers is that they would want to see refunds issued. And the second thing is that they would want to see regional services restored. And this is where we come in a bit when you think about regional services. So the map you saw, there's no question that Atlantic Canada, its service has been decimated more than other areas across the country because we have tighter border restrictions. It's really paid us benefits from a public health perspective, and we're all very grateful for that. But it certainly has caused our air service to tank even more. So all to say, that support needs to come. The carriers are very aware of the refund issues. It's really important to travelers to have confidence. If I'm going to book, I'm going to get a refund if the flight is canceled or the pandemic continues. And it's very much all part of how we need to recover. But I have to say, Ron, all participants in this supply chain need a level of support and need to work together probably more than ever, to be able to come out of this healthy and to be here to support the economy as it restarts and recovers from the pandemic.
Thank you very much, Joyce. So we have a question from Karen Ellis, who's joining us from the San Antonio International Airport. Over to you, Karen, if you could unmute and ask your question.
Thank you so much, Sherry. Joyce, great presentation as always. I get so much information, and whenever I hear you speak, it's like I'm always sitting on the edge of my chair. I'm super excited to have you as a panelist for the Customer Experience Symposium next week. We're looking forward to you sharing with us. But my question is, well, actually I have a question and then I have a comment. So the question is, I know you had to let go, or some of your team members were let go due to what we're going through in this pandemic. How do you keep the ones that are still there motivated?
Do you want me to take the question before you make your comment, Karen?
Please.
It's so great to see you. Thank you for joining us today. This is awesome. And so that is tough, right? So think about this, and it's been tough right from our board and myself down, is that you have a team that have been here, that have built us to the airport we are today. And, in the beginning, I think like everybody in every business, no matter what you're in, is, the sense was, oh, the pandemic won't last very long. So if you were to go back and look at my remarks at our AGM last year, which was in May, we were thinking by, September, we were starting to recover. And so we have long tenured employees. It's not like a carrier where we have a lot of employees that we can just on a dime, we're not flying these routes, so we're going to furlough you for a while. These are employees that do very important work at Halifax Stanfield. And so to think about initially, by the time we go through this process, we're going to come out at the other end, was our initial thought. And then when we recognized that, that the pandemic was going to last longer, we had to really turn our thinking to what is our airport going to look like at the end of this? And then who do we have to have here, recognizing the very important work we do from a safety and security perspective, our regulatory requirements, our requirement to operate 24/7. How are we going to reduce the size of our workforce? And I have to say, it was a very collaborative process. So in looking at that, I know our communications folks are on the line. It started with me, and it started from the top, communicating with our employees every step of the way on the pandemic, what its impact is, how long it's going to last, how, we are working to get support. But our organization ultimately, the message that it is going to be smaller coming out of this, and explaining why that was the case really was helpful. And so I think in the beginning, Karen, I was communicating at sometimes twice a week, through videos, through written communication, through in person, whenever that allowed. And just, that I think, we actually, did an employee engagement survey at the end of the year. We do one of these every year, and we had the highest scores ever on our employee engagement survey last year, because people really felt that they were well informed and they understood why we needed to do the reductions. And that led to the motivation to work. I mean, people are working harder than ever before. So you think we're still running this facility. Doesn't matter, as I mentioned, one flight or 1,000. People are doing the same work they did before, in many cases, plus more now with the reduced workforce. And they are motivated than ever. The industry, people love it. And so, it certainly, I couldn't be more proud of the team we have here. I get very emotional when I talk about it, because people are certainly, very committed to seeing us through this.
Wonderful,
Very good.
Joyce. So
Thank
we'll
you.
have
And
your
my
comment.
comment is,
Yes, sorry.
so my comment is, open the borders. We're ready to come back. We're planning a trip to Halifax. A bunch of us are planning. Of course, we got to come see Kelly, but we're coming to see it. We're just waiting. It's like it's like 5 or 6 of us are already coming, because everybody's like, we talk about it all the time. We're going to Halifax. That's our first trip. So
Yeah. For those on the line, we had a
coming
huge
back.
event planned last summer, which of course we realized was not going to happen. And so I think we can't wait to open up as well and welcome everybody back. Thank you for that.
I think many of us are
So
missing
thank you so much.
all of our
Appreciate it.
neighbors. Thank you for your question, Karen, and your comment. So we do have at least 3 other questions here. I'm going to pose this one. So throughout your presentation, you talked a lot about building consumer confidence and how that is key to getting things up and moving again at the airport. And you'd also mentioned that you had submitted a proposal to Dr. Strang, and that's in front of him, on trying to get some testing established at the airport. So, are there timelines around when that initiative could get up and running? We're certainly hearing news headlines about testing in other parts of Canada. What are you hearing about that, Joyce, and what we have for hope for that establishment here?
Yeah, we don't have specific, that's a good question. So we don't have specific timelines, but my hope, we submitted the proposal in January. And so my hope is that it would be in place, and always has been and continues to be, in Q1 of this year. So to be clear, this would be arrivals testing. As you know, we had our bubble. Our bubble is pretty small now. It's just us and PEI. We have no flights to PEI. So this would require everyone coming upon arrival to be tested. And some folks may say, well, you have to quarantine anyway, so what's the point? But it is just that added layer, right? So if you're tested immediately, your quarantine may look different for you and or your family if you know whether you are carrying COVID as a result of entering Nova Scotia. And that would be supplemented by a second test, I believe it's in 7 days. So please, every chance you get, speak about the importance of testing at the airport, and we're confident it will come. It's a very busy time right now for the province, as you know. They're very focused on health screening, and so too they should be. And we just see this as another step, not only for passengers, but for our workers, and then ultimately for departing passengers as well.
Great. So I'm going to ask one other question, and then we'll move to Blair. So I'll call upon you after Joyce provides the answer to this. So many businesses have had to change and adapt their business models, obviously through COVID, and the goalposts keep moving and timelines move. And this has been a result of what's happened with the pandemic. So with the routes that you're currently serving, are there opportunities? Are you seeing any trends that will change the way that you are serving clients? So what does your authority look like in, 3 years from now, 2024, when the traffic returns to previous levels?
Yeah, for sure. I think the main change I think you'll see is the health screening that I mentioned earlier in my presentation. So your process through Halifax Stanfield to board a flight, hopefully you'll be tested. So wouldn't that be great, even if it's a rapid test? But your process will be more touchless than it is today, for sure. what we call the curb to gate experience, we think will look very different. And this isn't just because of COVID, this is just the importance of health screening. And then your arrival hopefully will look different as well, in that you will have a test upon arrival. So, 2024 is what we're saying. It will take perhaps even into 2025 to get back to, passenger levels we saw in 2019. Think about a health passport, right? So think about a passport that you need now when you go into other countries to say you've had certain vaccines. Is think about a health passport that then you can show that will get you seamlessly through the travel process. That's where our industry needs to go, and that's what we're advocating for, the testing and something like a health passport as an industry long term.
Wonderful. Thank you for that.
Mm.
So Blair Richards, I would invite you to unmute your connection and pose your question, please.
Thank you very much, Sherry, for taking the question, and to you, Ms. Carter, for the great presentation. That's a wonderful update. I dared to ask really about your planning, and I think it folds into marketing. It's been my experience that when you face a challenge as large as you are at the moment, oftentimes in retrospect, you'll see that it was also great opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And so I understand when you say how critical government support is, that's really short term and about survivability. But you said you need to get back, to dollars flowing from other places. I've traveled the world extensively in my career, and I don't think I've ever witnessed a greater feeling about our city, our province, both the Maritimes and the Atlantic. We are on the map now. So I'm not traveling physically, but I've maintained the contacts. And what I'm hearing across the board are people that are excited about how we've handled the pandemic in comparison to most other places, about us winning awards for this place to live, this is a place to work. There are just a host of positive feelings about us. So I think we do have an opportunity to leverage that, although it's a bit longer term. That's forced on us. My sense is that if we approach it incrementally, it wasn't lost on me, your statement that the first quarter of the calendar year is really the critical period in terms of volumes. And I was optimistic that maybe, next spring would be the year. So I'm hoping that you would be able to ramp up. And what I had in mind specifically was that in my mind, I don't know if it's a cliche, but you can't start the marketing too early. Timing would be everything around the messaging. But my sense is that Halifax is flying. And that's the World Trade, that's the Business Inc., that's the port, and that will be you. And we need to hammer that kind of a message. So I'm wondering what you're doing around the planning with respect to the marketing.
Yeah, thank you, Blair. Those are such those are such great comments, and I couldn't agree with you more. The advantages that we've had as a region going into the pandemic are going to be the exact same, only amplified by the pandemic coming out of it, as you mentioned. And so, boy, you are bang on in terms of the marketing. We've had kind of a start to our marketing plan ready to go, and keep pushing it out, because there is nothing worse than starting that too soon. And obviously ensuring that as we start to promote travel again, we have the public sentiment to travel, because the last thing we want to do is obviously begin this process before folks are ready. So building the confidence, as you mentioned, absolutely the support we need is in the short term. As I mentioned, we're building our debt beyond levels I would absolutely in any day like to do, because we're going to need that coming out to put in place some of the new marketing programs, some of the new processes through the airport that I was asked about in the last question. We're going to need that support to build that. And I do think the challenge we have, which we are as optimistic as ever to take, is that it falls on us together with our partners to show, as I mentioned, the marketing we did before, why when those limited resources from our carriers are put back into the market, why that should be in this region. And the demand will drive it. And I think the demand is going to be there. I mean, you know, you hear Karen say, we can't wait to come. And so, yeah, with the marketing, the timing of it is going to be really important. It's actually where we're going to have to invest more than we ever did for that exact reason. We will get there. It will just take some time. And I worry deeply about the financial strength of the carriers coming out of this. We need them to be able to provide those services that you just mentioned. So many people want to come here because of the great job. You would have seen that the province has started a campaign right now about why you can live and work in Nova Scotia. Air connectivity is going to be so important to that, and they know it, but it's just not the time to start marketing and promoting that travel. But we will do it, and we will do it when the time is right. And I do believe it will have absolutely the positive impact that we've always had. It'll just take a little while to get there. So we're thinking now 2024, maybe even into 2025, particularly on some of the international services before we get back to where we were. But we'll start from what we got, those 4 destinations, and grow from there. So thank you. That was a really great. I know we're pretty well out of time, Sherry, but a really great way to kind of end the session. And I hope that addressed your concern, your comments.
Wonderful. Again, Joyce, thank you so much for taking time today and talking about, the Halifax Airport Authority. And, certainly as the Chamber, we view it as a very important economic driver, not just for the region, but for the province, as so much cargo import and export moves through your location on an annual basis. And we really do need to make sure that these links to the rest of Canada and the world remain vibrant and can survive through this pandemic until we're all in a place, not just survival mode anymore, but where we're back into growth mode. And that's where I hope that we can all get to in sooner rather than later as vaccines come online and more testing comes online. So again, thank you so much for being with us today. And we always look forward to hearing from you.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Thank you so much to your members for participating and for the interest. And yeah, I really do appreciate the support as well.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Okay. Take care, everyone. We'll see you soon at the Halifax Airport.
Thank you.